In my 2 years here in Dublin, I've heard from people and read papers and understand that life in Ireland is vastly different over the last 30 or 40 years. That coming out of a degree of radical, widespread poverty, it's a nation that has moved into the fast lane in so many ways, economically thriving, even through boom and bust like the Celtic Tiger and then the 2008 downturn. It's an economy that is thriving, and it's a country that is multifaceted. It's no longer just the ethnic Irish of old. One need only walk around here in the city center, and we could sometimes long to hear an Irish accent. Everyone is from somewhere else, many of them really working, hardworking, poor immigrants coming to make a better life, and others who have come to work at Google and Facebook and all of those new corporations down on the docks. Dublin is truly an international city. Ireland has become a multifaceted, internationally focused country with huge new potential and a variety of possibilities before every sixth-year graduate. And it also comes with some hesitations. We know that the practice of religion, especially the faith we practice, is radically different from 40 years ago, and that young people are increasingly just not coming and rejecting even the faith that they grew up with, or perhaps they didn't grow up with, that their parents may have grown up with. Alexandria, in the century before Jesus, is a lot like Dublin. Alexandria was probably one of the most important cities in the ancient world. It was the center of learning, it was the center of commerce, it was the center of excitement. It had a 400-foot-tall lighthouse that guided ships into its ports from all over the known world. People spoke every language. And there was the sense of possibility there. It was the center of great learning, the most important library of the ancient Near East, and probably the world was located there. It was a place of possibility and promise and hope. Every possible language was spoken in its streets, and it was home to the largest population of Jews outside of Israel itself. Jews who were now several generations away from speaking or knowing Hebrew, who knew only Greek. And it was to these people that the author of our first reading was writing today. It was to remind his fellow those followers of his religion, of what it is that they had and what it is they were at some risk of losing. This passage we have today from Wisdom comes from a section that was probably a homily. It was often regarded and is often regarded as the only true midrash, Jewish explanation of Scripture in the Scriptures themselves. And some midrash were line-by-line commentary. Others were more a homily, and this seems to have been a homily, may have even been a Passover homily, but then adapted for use in this book by the author. And what's important about this kind of writing is lines that we don't get today that preface the entire commentary are missing. And these lines give explanation to why what is coming is important. And in it, in those few lines, a few chapters earlier, the author explicates that the Passover is the foundational experience of Israel. It not only created them as a people, but in the very moment of their salvation, in the moment of their glorification as God's blessed people, Egypt itself was put down, especially in the death of its eldest sons. And that this moment was a moment of transfiguration and grace that came to the Israelites as they began to pack up and flee. And they sat on the banks of the Red Sea looking back at the coming army. They did so knowing that they had nothing to fear, because through the 10 plagues, through their experience and the promise that they had been given to God, from God so much earlier, they had nothing to fear. This is the same momentum we see happening in the gospel today, in this very long passage that takes several elements and weaves them together. But there's a heading there in our reading today that's important for us. Jesus said to his disciples, "There's no need to be afraid, little flock, for it has pleased your Father to give you the kingdom." A few chapters earlier, he has taught them the Our Father and taught them to pray for the kingdom. He's now letting them know that the kingdom has come. The kingdom is theirs. And so everything else has to be done through and seen through that lens, through that understanding that all that they hope for and all that they want, the fulfillment of the promise to those people leaving Egypt so many centuries earlier, is theirs. And it is that from which they live. If there is nothing to fear, sell your possessions, give it away, trust in God. But this isn't simply a pie-in-the-sky, future-oriented reality. It's also about what you do now when you live out of that faith, when you live out of that moment. You stand with your loins girded, in this translation, dressed for action. Pull up your long robe, tuck it in, and get ready to go. These are the words that were given, the orders given to the Israelites as they prepared to leave Egypt. It's the same words that Jesus is giving to his disciples. Be ready. Be ready for if the master comes and knocks, to open the door. And we know that Jesus has come, he has knocked. And he's saying to his disciples, you have responsibilities in this world. You have responsibilities to share the good news, to be ready to welcome the King. And if you're not ready, and you should be, there will be punishments to come. If you are a person of responsibility and you failed them, there's even greater punishment, because if you belong to the movement, if you are on the way with Christ, if you understand the fullness of what you have received, you will enter into a new way of being. You will see with those eyes of hope, and you will bring healing and hope to the world. Today, what we see in the Old Testament reading is carried through to exactly what we see in the New Testament. One of the prime differences, in the Old Testament, we saw the death of the firstborn sons as a sign of God's power. In the New Testament, we see the death of the firstborn son, God's very own son, as the means and the source of our salvation. And it is into that death, into that suffering we enter into, so that we can enter into the fullness of the resurrection. So as we enter today the celebration of the Eucharist, as we extend our own hands in a few moments to receive the body and blood of Christ, we do so knowing that we too, like Christ, are to lay down our lives, and we too will raise up to new life. That new life isn't just in some future day. It's when we allow God's grace to work in us today, when we see with those eyes of faith, when we are not afraid, when we accept that we live now in the kingdom.